guys, and welcome to Now What podcast. I'm Kristen Comstock, and really the purpose of this podcast is to get into topics that we don't usually talk about, such as adoption, just some hard topics, and that's what we're going to be talking about today is adoption. We're going to actually be continuing Amanda's story, and last time we were together, we talked about your failed adoption, and so we really got in depth into what happened and how that impacted your family and how it moved you on to different steps in your adoption story. And you are adopted.
I am.
And you have adopted.
I have.
So you know all sides of the story except for really being a birth mother.
Right.
So which I think is really cool. And so before we get into really the redemption story, which is a lot of times that's the only thing people hear. They don't hear the during your trial. They just hear the redemption piece of it. Before we dive into that, you have some kids with some hilarious, funny, great personalities.
Yes.
So I really want you to tell, you have a ton of stories. I wish we could sit here all day and listen to them because they're great. But give us a good story, a good funny story to kick it off.
Okay. So Mattson, my oldest, he's definitely got a real quirky sense of humor, and he doesn't even really do it on purpose. That's what I think makes it so funny. But I think one of my favorite stories was he was about 3 years old, and we were working out in the yard, and he had a little yellow Hummer that he would drive around, and we lived on a cul-de-sac, so he would just drive in circles. And we were just kind of watching him out of the corner of our eye, but not really watching him.
Watching every move he
made.
Exactly.
And he came pulling up in the driveway in his Hummer, and there was a child in his Hummer with him.
Not one of your children.
Not because we only had one at that time. And the little boy, he didn't talk. He looked to be probably about 2. Oh my gosh. And my husband looked at Mattson and said, "Where did you get him?" And he said, "Well, he was out playing in his yard." So I said, "Hey, kid, get in." So he drove this kid home and basically kidnapped somebody's child. My toddler kidnapped a toddler.
And you didn't know where they came from.
And we didn't know where he lived because we had never seen him before. And so my husband said, "You have to take him home."
Show us the way.
That's what he said. He said, "You need to show me where he lives." So they had to take the child home. But he was bummed because he had found himself somebody to play with and brought him home. And we made him return him.
Oh my gosh, which is hilarious.
It is.
He's doing stuff like that all the time.
Oh, he does stuff like that regularly. And our youngest, Wesson, is not quite as outwardly quirky. But he is notorious for just doing things that make your life inconvenient. So, for example, he'll take either your towel or the bath mat while you're in the shower. He likes to reset the temperature on the refrigerator till it freezes everything and they explode. So little things like that.
Right.
He just...
You're like, gosh, come on.
That are just inconvenient. But he loves it. He's so proud of himself when he does those things.
So it's so funny.
But you know what? It keeps life fun because life is hard enough that we need a little humor.
I can't believe it. And like I said, you have stories like that all the time.
For days.
So y'all have to stick around for more, but that's all for now. So we're gonna dive into your adoption redemption story, which I'm so excited about. We really covered some amazing content and talking about the failed adoption. I think it's so important because it's not really talked about.
Right.
But we're going to get into the redemption story of y'all's adoption. So at this point, I'm just going to catch you guys up. You'll have to go listen to the other part of our conversation to hear all the goodness. But at this point, you've had a failed adoption.
Right.
And so really the first question is, at what point did you decide to dive back in?
Well, honestly, we didn't. We had prayed and we just were open to when the Lord was ready for us to restart the process. We didn't have like an actual signing of paper or anything like that.
Because you had everything
was
file,
done. Right.
And God had told you to wait. That was the last thing that he spoke to you guys, and he gave you Exodus 14:14, which says,
"The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still."
Okay. And so you were left with that.
Right.
Right. So
I remember praying and I thought, there's no way I can go through this entire process again. It would just break me. I was still trying to pick the pieces back up to move forward. So I thought, I hope the Lord doesn't we still felt called to adoption, but in my heart of hearts, I thought, I don't think I can do this whole process all over again just to then be left brokenhearted.
Right. And there's no guarantee.
No guarantees. None.
Like you said last time, there is always a chance that the birth mom
can change her
at
mind.
The very end can change her mind.
Right.
And you have to be pretty brave and courageous and strong to say, I am going to basically prepare for my child.
Right.
I'm going to accept this child as my own. And in your case, go through almost the whole entire pregnancy, getting pictures, and all the things, and be willing, or I guess knowing, even though you're not willing, you know that the option ultimately for the birth mom is they can ultimately choose not to move forward with the family that they've chosen to adopt the birth mom's child.
Yeah.
So, moving back into the adoption process, you already had everything on file.
Right.
So did you really have to do anything to move forward, or
Not
you just kind of had to tell
necessarily.
the adoption agency that you're open again, you're ready?
Right. We could have said, go ahead and throw our book back in the piles again, to possibly be chosen by a birth mother again. But we really were just kind of still in that wait of, do we start putting in effort again, or do we just wait and trust?
And so what did you do?
We waited.
You waited and you
We
trusted.
did.
And so, and I'm so excited for this part. When you started moving forward again, I'm not going to totally reveal what happened yet, even though I'm really excited about it. Would you have considered you and Matt and your family as a whole, would you have considered yourself fully healed before the process began again?
No.
So where was your heart at this time? Where were you guys at emotionally, physically, spiritually? Where were you at?
I think for the most part, healed is not, I don't know that we'll ever be truly healed, because it is grief,
Yeah.
But
And it is a loss of a child.
It's a loss. It was a loss for us. And that's not something you can just turn off or get over necessarily. But we had moved forward with our life, as far as it wasn't all consuming any longer. When I talked about her, it still brought tears. But we were able to move forward in life as far as not being stuck in the grief.
Right. Okay. So, without further ado, please tell us what happened.
Right. Thank goodness it didn't end there, right?
Right.
Thank
goodness. Thank goodness.
So
and for a while, it could have, right?
It could have.
We really didn't know what was going to happen.
We really did not know. Literally overnight, we got a call that there had been a drop baby, which drop baby, stork baby.
So tell us what that means.
Okay,
what
so
is a drop baby?
There's different scenarios. There's, of course, you hear the scenarios of, babies being left in dumpsters, at hospitals, and fire stations.
And so that really happens.
That really
people
happens.
really have a baby
and leave them.
and just leave them.
Right. It does happen. Or there's situations where somebody comes into the hospital without a adoption plan or anything in place, but says, I'm not able to take this child home with me.
Okay.
So ours was basically that situation, that birth mom had decided that she wasn't going to be taking the baby that she had just had home with her. And so the hospitals then will contact agencies and whatnot and see who has somebody who's home study approved, background checked, ready to go that moment. And so we got a call, and they said, we have a baby at the hospital. He's already been born. Would you consider adopting him? And of course, my heart of hearts was like, yes, absolutely. But
let's pause with that call.
Right.
I mean, were you just totally mind blown?
Well, I was shocked.
What?
I knew it was a thing. And we have many friends who have adopted. So we're in the adopting community.
But not that much time has gone by at this point.
Right, no.
So it had to have felt like a whirlwind. You went through this whole adoption process. You had a failed adoption. You're still grieving the loss of a child. And, for a while you were still pursuing legally being able to essentially get custody of this child.
Right.
And then you guys are finally essentially moving forward with your life. Like you said, you had started moving forward with your life. And then you get a call.
Right. Out of the blue.
Where was your heart? I mean, did your heart sink into your stomach? Did you have butterflies? Were you just like, what is going on?
Yeah. Part of you thinks, and I remember thinking, like, is this real? Is this, because again, it just wasn't something that we were familiar with.
Right.
In the adoption community, we didn't know anybody personally. And so it had been around 6 months at this point, from basically the closing of one door to now,
which is really
the
not
opening
that
of another.
long of a time. I mean, when you think about 6 months, especially grieving the loss of a child, whether, and like you said before, who is still physically here on earth, they didn't die, but it was a child that you now would never have.
Right.
I mean, that's not very much time to go
it's really not. No, it's really not. And we still honestly had everything set up in the nursery for a girl. Mm-hmm. We had put everything in that room and closed the door. We hadn't taken things off the wall. We hadn't returned clothes. Girl clothes were still hanging in the closet. Glitter was still on the wall.
So you get this call. And what do? You call Matt immediately? Right. What do you do?
Yeah, I call my husband at work. He's always at work when these things happen.
And somewhat unreachable for what he does.
And not easily reachable. And so I told him, and of course he's like, yes, we of course prayed and made sure, but we knew.
You knew. I mean, quite literally, a door was shut.
Right.
And another one was
like slammed open.
Yeah. And here's your child.
Exactly. So he was a day old when we got the call, and then we picked him up 2 days later.
Okay.
From the hospital.
And you knew, so you got the call, and you guys ended up telling them, yes, 100%,
absolutely,
we want this child. What did you do in the 2 days? That
we had a lot to do in those.
Did you have 2 days or 1 day?
We had really just one full day.
Okay, so you had one full day to prepare.
One full day.
What did that day look like?
Oh, it was chaos. It was chaos. It was returning of girl clothes to get some boy clothes, taking the flowers off the wall, changing out, girl bedding for boy bedding. It was chaos trying to...
And Matt was not going to allow there to be a glitter wall for a son that
to come home to. Right, exactly.
So, I mean, you guys aren't just like returning clothes, because some of this stuff you really can do after you have your child.
Right.
But this wasn't just returning clothes and everything. I mean, y'all are basically doing like extreme home makeover overnight for a room.
Exactly.
So you're painting.
Yep.
Was there a moment where you just kind of stopped together? Like, were there any moments where you just kind of stopped and you were like, is this really happening?
I don't think it was until the next day, until we were on the way to the hospital. I think we were so focused on fixing everything and preparing it and getting ready that day we didn't. On the way to the hospital to pick him up, we really did. We're like, this is real. Like, we're really going to the hospital right now to pick up a baby we didn't know existed 2 days ago.
Right. Or that would be available to you.
Would be ours.
Yeah.
We had no clue.
Okay. So I really want to do a good job of describing what it was like. Again, this is kind of a whirlwind.
Right.
I want to do a good job of describing what it was like to go pick up your son.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
So we had to make arrangements for our older son, for somewhere for him to go.
And you didn't really necessarily fully know how long it was going to take.
No,
right?
We didn't know if this was something that we would go, meet him, bring him. We didn't know if we were bringing him home that day.
Point, we didn't have a clue. Could she still change her mind? Because had the birth mother actually signed documentation?
She had not signed them yet. We knew she'd be signing them that morning. So originally it was supposed to be one time, and that got pushed a little bit later,
So
a couple hours later.
How did that mess with your emotions at all?
Oh, it
Did you
messed
get
with
nervous or were
Yeah.
you afraid? Were you like, this is going to be another
I thought this was
disappointment?
going to be that situation all over again. And it was a very short amount of time. It felt like forever.
Right.
It was a couple of hours.
Right.
But we finally were given the okay to go ahead and come up to the hospital. We had to wait once we got there. And we sat at a McDonald's and we just sat there and waited, to get the call that
Right.
he's clear. Everything's signed. You can come up. And I remember going up and walking in, and he was in the bassinet in this big room all by himself. And it was just like, I can't even explain the feelings, that came over us. Like, this is our son. He's going to be ours. We get to bring him home and love him and care for him. And this is the baby that we have prayed for years.
Right.
And it was so special because when we looked at him, my husband and my son Matson all have this little cleft in their chin. And we looked at him and he had the cleft in his chin. And, we had said it didn't matter if the baby we adopted looked like us. We didn't have specific, thoughts or anything like that on how he,
Right.
Should look or not look or she or whatever.
Right.
But it was almost like the Lord had just like stamped him. Like I chose him for you. And when we were able, like when we thought back and did the math, his birth mom was pregnant with him when we were walking through the whole failed adoption. And so it was like the Lord had gone ahead and prepared the child that he had for us all along.
Right.
Before we even knew, and it's special to think about that he had already made provisions for our heartbreak before the heartbreak happened.
And you didn't know that he was providing a way for you or that he was making a plan
Right.
for you.
Right.
But he had already,
Done
your
it.
child was already in the birth mother's womb. And
Right.
really being prepared for you at that very moment.
Right.
So you get to the hospital, you
Right.
go in and you have your son there.
Right.
Who is Wesson.
Right.
At what point did you realize that he was your son?
Well, he was laying in the bassinet and I walked over to him and looked at him, and we had talked about the chin, and our adoption attorney had noticed that the bedding that they had put in his little bassinet was camo, which was so funny because my husband's, Army.
Military, yeah.
So it was just like so many details, and we're talking about that. And I looked back to the case manager and I said, "Can I pick him up?" And she said, "He's your son."
You're like,
And it was
Oh.
at that moment that like I didn't need permission. He was my son, and I just remember looking at him the first time and thinking, he's really ours. And the nurse came in with the paperwork and she said, "Well, what's his name?" And it was like, we get to name him. Like he's really really ours. And then we took him home a couple hours later, which was so wild. Because I said, I came in here with no baby, and like 3 hours later, I'm leaving here a mom to a second child.
and I like what you said when we were talking earlier. You said it was the quickest delivery, but the longest labor.
Yeah. The delivery was very short, but we labored for 2 years for him because it was 2 years from the time that we started the process to when we brought him home.
How close to 2 years was it?
I think it was just right at 2 years.
Really?
Yeah. And so a 2-year 2-year labor is a long time, but it's just like in regular childbirth. As soon as you hold the baby, you forget the pain that it took to get there.
Right.
Because
and your heart is just so happy.
Right. You're so overwhelmed with love, and you're just so grateful that the process no longer matters.
Right.
Yeah.
So what does life look like now?
So it's chaotic with a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old boys.
And they are boys.
They're covered in dirt all of the time.
What were they arguing about the other day that you told me?
They were arguing about whose mud was whose.
I'm like, I can only imagine how much mud they were actually covered in.
It's a lot of mud. It's a lot of mud. But it is so sweet. They have the sweetest relationship. There is no like, he's not my biological brother. He's not, Madsen was old enough when we went through the process to know. I wasn't pregnant
does he
with
know?
him.
Are you guys really open with them about the adoption?
Wesson doesn't know he's too young to understand adoption as a whole yet. We talk about it. We're very open about it. And it is a discussion that as soon as we know he's ready, that we will sit down and give him as many details as we can or he wants to know. But it's an important part of his life. It's part of who he is. And we don't ever want that to be a secret or something that to be ashamed of. But Madsen knows the process was different than, other moms who go in pregnant and bring a baby home.
Right.
But he loves his brother so much. And he's so thankful for him. And Wesson looks up to Madsen. And it's a lot of fun. A lot of crazy, but a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. So I think ending on a good note, but before we do that, I just am curious about what would you say to a family that's currently navigating a failed adoption? What encouragement maybe would you give them?
I would just encourage them to hang on, to feel the emotions that they need to feel, to grieve however it is that they need to grieve, because I think part of love also sometimes means grief, and that means you truly did love that child and wanted that child. And I think that's an important part of adoption, because it does come about differently than carrying and birthing them. But the want is so deep and so real and so true, that realizing that your grief is valid because you love that child that much, but to hang on, because the grief is hard and it is painful, but it was so worth it. It always is.
Yeah. And what was something that maybe God spoken to you that helped you through the trial part? Because again, we don't always see the trial. We see the triumph.
Right.
We see the outcome. We see the redemption story.
Right.
So what was something that God spoken to you or that you clung to that helped you navigate the failed adoption to get to, because there are so many things that we go through in our life that if we let it overcome us, it will overcome us.
Right.
And there either it takes longer to get to the redemption or you don't get to it because the trial has overcome you. And so I really am, I guess, specifically asking, what encouragement maybe did you experience or receive from God that helped you get through the trial so you could get to the triumph?
I think leaning into his faithfulness, that we were able to remember the places that he had been faithful in our life before, and we knew he would be faithful again, that it may not look exactly like how we thought it would look.
Or how you heard your story was, how your parents adopted you.
Right. But that he was going to care for us, and that this wasn't just I didn't expect that to happen. The Lord was never confused. He was never caught off guard by this situation. And so I think just leaning into knowing who he was, that he was a good God. And I think our faith was really important, because this was so hard on us that I can't even fathom walking through this if you don't have a relationship with Christ. Because we really had to lean in and lean on Christ to get us through the grief and not allow it to overwhelm us.
Right.
And so I think in just trusting that the Lord knew the desires of our heart, and he hadn't taken those desires from us. So trusting that he was going to fulfill the desires of our heart, helped us get to the other side of, okay, maybe it's not a no, it's a wait. And knowing that his wait is always worth it.
And I really, as we're wrapping up, I really love y'all's story, because a lot of times in the waiting, it could be years. I mean, we could be talking 5, 10, 15 years. And so it seems so unreachable. It seems, where is God?
Right.
How can this be worked together for the good to glorify him when my heart's desire is broken and shattered in pieces on the ground? And so really being able to describe your story from start to finish and seeing all the things that God was doing
Right.
And when you were probably crying many
floor.
tears
Yeah.
on the floor.
Right.
And you described this moment, and this is where I really want to end because it's such a beautiful moment. I just want to end with you describing the moment that you were in your nursery with Wesson, because I think it's a beautiful way to end this story.
Yeah. I remember bringing him home and sitting in the rocking chair and rocking and feeding him and just telling the Lord how thankful I was for this gift. And then looking and seeing that space on the floor where I had shed so many tears and didn't understand what was ahead for us. And then seeing that come full circle, that those tears weren't wasted at all. They were never wasted. And then I was able to sit there and hold that baby that the Lord had planned for us all along. And it was just a sweet moment.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your story.
Of course.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Now What with Kristen Comstock. Be sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.